I have just a few minutes past 4 o'clock p.m. So the fourth meeting of the Citizens Commission on Elected Officials' Compensation is hereby called to order. Let me first welcome all participants who are present, and first of all to thank all of our commission members for your continued service, your dedication, and your commitment to our mission. Certainly want to thank the staff for all of their hard work to date, for all of the work that it took to coordinate a very productive and very detailed agenda that we have before us this afternoon. And we continue to look forward to all the work that's already been done and all the work that we know that you will be doing to assist us in achieving our goals and our objectives. For the record, our commission members, Kristen Easterday, Dawn Tyler Lee, Marshall Moore, and William Murdoch, along with Commission Chair Chet Christie, are all here and present. Would either Mr. Paul or Mr. McGinnis please identify staff who are in the room, or if you'd like, we can go around the room and have each of the staff introduce themselves, whichever is more expedient.
Have everybody introduce themselves.
Sounds good.
Josh Cox from the City Attorney's Office.
Ken Paul, Columbus City Council.
Rory McGinnis from the Mayor's Office.
Greg Beaverson, Department of Human Resources.
Cheryl Austin, City Clerk's Office.
Angie Flevin, City Clerk.
Good. And
Tom Knack, City Council Office as well.
Bill Lafayette, owner of Regionomics.
Dr. Lafayette, thank you for being present today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting.
So,
Edie Long, Civil Service. Nicole Brandon, Human Resources.
outstanding. And the quiet and unassuming Mr. John Ivanek in the back. Thank you all. Now, in addition to, we do have a couple of guests here. Dr. Lafayette introduced himself just a moment ago, but it's also my understanding that we are fortunate to have with us a couple of our colleagues from the city of Phoenix. Please forgive me if I either mispronounce or somehow mess up a title. We'll try to get it right. I understand that it's Karen Peters, who's the Senior Executive Assistant to the City Manager. Is that correct? Wonderful. Karen, good afternoon. Yes. Good to have you. And Sam Feldman, who is a Management Assistant too with the city. Fantastic. Thank you both for taking time out of your very busy schedules to accommodate our needs today. We appreciate your attendance, and although it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you guys have just a little bit past the lunch hour, I think, right?
That's great.
All right. Outstanding. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll be getting to the portion of the agenda where we will be addressing issues here shortly. All right. First item is the approval of minutes from our April 8th, 2015 meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I would like to suggest 2 corrections to the minutes. I don't think Mr. Cox or Ms. Bass were present at the last meeting, so I just asked it to be notated that they were absent.
Okay, very good. Are there any other corrections, deletions, any other amendments to the minutes?
Looks like maybe there needs to be a grammatical addition to the last sentence on the second page of the first paragraph. Mr. Christie stated it would be good to reach out to another city that had been through the process and ask what considerations were used when analyzing data. So the addition of were.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. Any further corrections, deletions, or amendments?
With the corrections, Mr. Chair, I move to approve minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll make a second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we would approve the minutes as corrected. Any questions? There being none, all in favor may approve by the usual sign of voting. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed have the same right. Nay. Ayes have it. Minutes are approved unanimously. Very good. Thank In one of our previous meetings, the commissioner specifically requested that our staff, if at all possible, would arrange for us to meet either personally, which frankly would have been our preference to meet out in Phoenix. But that being the case and cost being obviously a factor, we thought at least a video conference would be of value to us. The purpose of the meeting was to essentially gain some further insight in terms of some of the steps specifically taken by you to achieve many of the things that are our objectives as well. And with that in mind, we were very fortunate to have both, I believe both Ken and Rory and others who may have been involved with the coordination. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time thank you for sharing your time with us. We have a series of questions that we would like to propose to you, and I would encourage each of our commission members, please, to jump in, add additional questions if you deem them appropriate, but more importantly, as we go through each of these questions, to ask for any clarification and to engage our colleagues from Phoenix as much as possible so that we are taking full advantage of their previous experience. So with that in mind, unless anyone has any initial thoughts or any other clarification, I'd like to move forward and move right into the questions. All right, let's start with a basic baseline here. How often does the Phoenix Citizens Commission on Salaries for Elected Officials meet?
They are charged to meet every 2 years in advance of the odd number year in mayor elections.
And how long does the commission have to complete their work?
The terms of appointment are 3 months, so we typically appoint them in January of that odd number year and have to report before the terms expire. We are just about to get it done here in Phoenix in advance of the August election.
Thank you.
Outstanding. Can you briefly describe for us the government structure for the city of Phoenix, whether it's strong mayor, council, city manager, council, structure of government, etc., whether or not you have ward or at-large representation of your council members, whether your city attorney, for example, is an elected or appointed position, likewise with your city auditor?
Happy to, yes. Phoenix is the council manager of government. The city has 8 council and obviously the mayor, so a total of 9 elected officials. They are elected, but geographic district. The only look that the council appoints are the city manager and the chief presiding judge of the municipal court. The rest of the employees of the city are hired and fired by the city manager, including the city attorney, the city auditor, chief financial officer, and others. Only the chief presiding judge, or I should say all the judges of the municipal court and the city manager are appointed by the council.
Okay. Your city attorney and your city auditor, I may have missed what you shared. Are they elected positions?
No, they are not.
Okay, they're appointed by the mayor. Okay.
Mayor.
Manager, yes.
Okay, by the city manager. Okay. Any further clarification of question 3? Okay. When gathering compensation information or research, are there any particular characteristics that the commission look for in determining what would be considered your peer cities?
Sure, so I'll take that one. Thanks for having us. Phoenix
looks at the top 25 cities. So I'm actually the one who does the research, and we look at what is the compensation of the top 25 cities population for their mayor and city council. So we include all cities, no matter the form of government, but on the information we provide to the members, we identify whether they're council manager or not. And say, you know, these cities are council member and the others are not. So it's just those top 25. We also look at the top 7 cities in Arizona, all of whom have council manager forms of government. So that's another way we compare ourselves is to our regional comparisons.
With regard to the top 25 cities, do you take into consideration any other factors such as cost of living, region, any other considerations along those lines? Or is it just the top 25 cities, period?
We just use the top 25 cities. I think it's one factor the commission looks at, our commission looks at, and in the end with a lot of the data on salaries, it's there's probably no other city like Phoenix, just like there's no other city like Columbus or no other city like any other city. And so we kind of let the commission itself judge, right, what is the relative weight of these cities? So when we look at ours, for example, New York City, much higher pay for both the mayor and council members, but it's not, the commission knows it's a large city, their duties are very different. That is part of the conversation, but we kind of let the members each evaluate it themselves because I don't think we think there's a formula for getting to the right number. It's more of this, all of the information together. So one of the things we do note when we present the information is year by year what went up. So every 2 years we use the same form basically and what cities, so we note what cities have changed and said, you know, some cities have started to go up, or this year, for example, 1 or 2 cities in the last 2 years have gone down a little bit even. But we do make that kind of note, which I think, if anything, plays more into the conversation. What's the trend? No matter what size city you're at.
Just one more clarification. You're looking at the population of the city specifically, not the metro area, correct?
Yes. Yeah, the city proper.
May I ask, where does Phoenix rank in terms of size? Where does Phoenix rank?
Population, we are currently the 6th largest in population in the United States.
Okay, thank you.
I'll move on to the next question. How does the commission rank or prioritize the information that the statistical information that you receive?
So we give them a real wide variety of information, both before the meeting in a packet of information, and also during the meeting they ask questions that we're prepared to answer because they seem to come up every 2 years when you do this. So, you know, each member sort of weighs information a little differently. I think through the conversation we noticed that sometimes, for example, one statistic we give is what is the median income in Phoenix and how does that compare to the council salary? And so I think, you know, usually every year out of the 7 members, one will say, you know, median income is only this much. And so I don't think we see a need to increase. And then, but other members will talk about, you know, other cities near us where there are trends in salaries. We're still the highest paying in the cities near us, but, or what is the trend in the state level, even if it's happened recently? You know, what budget concerns are there? You know, and also the increasing sort of workload of council members over the last, you know, 10 years or so. Our mayor and council, I think, work more now than ever, and some struggle to pull down outside employment. Many of our council members do have outside employment, but some do not. So that's another thing that, you know, that comes up as well, just how many are. So I think the commission members themselves really prioritize and rank it. We just provide the information to staff. And then each commission member sees it, I think, a little differently.
And as Sam indicated, they each seem to come up with new questions that we haven't answered yet. So at the meetings, we are we're prepared with relevant staff from various departments, human resources, city clerk, etc., so that whatever question might arise, that's on the commissioner's comments, we can try and answer right there on the spot.
I think we may have neglected, or I may have neglected to ask this question very early on, but something you just said prompts another opportunity, and that is how often has the commission actually met since its establishment?
So they've met 16 times since 1973, and that's every 2 years since 1973. We, over the last, I think, three groups of 2 years, or 3 commissions that we've had over the last 6 years, they've met only once in a meeting. So we provide background information, and then in the meeting they discuss the background information, we present it, we answer any other questions they have, and then it's been sufficient for them over the last couple of years to say, okay, that's all we need to know, and they have voted in that meeting, and it's done.
Pretty efficient in Phoenix.
Yeah.
You had about 15 opportunities to get it right?
Our motto is one and done.
I think ultimately we'd like to adopt that. All right, excellent.
If I may, Mr. Chair. So with that format that you just stated and having the one meeting over the last 6 years, are there vehicles for public engagement throughout the process, or does it just rest with the commission members themselves?
The meetings are public meetings, and ample notice is given. We didn't have any members of the public that we have this year, but it's out there for anyone to participate. Certainly, if people are motivated, they can contact the commissioners prior to the meeting and express their views.
But no
We
formal
also
public
encourage
hearing?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, no formal public hearing for citizens to come down and comment or give feedback on specific recommendations?
At the meeting, there is an opportunity for the public to speak. So the chairman will recognize a member of the public. Do you have any testimony you'd like to provide to the commission? And then at the end of the agenda, there's another call to the public. So yeah, if there are folks who want to give input, they do have that opportunity at the meeting.
Thank you.
But in terms of large community-based public hearings, we have not done those in the past. I think the other thing that we do is the chair before the meeting sends a note to all of his other commission members or her other commission members and says, usually something like, I encourage you to talk to your neighbors and friends, other community members, so you can get a feel for what do other people think. So I think there's sort of an informal process that people use. And generally as well, they're, like yourselves, I'm sure, they're community leaders in their own right, appointed by the mayor and council, that generally have an idea already because they've told people around them, I'm going to this meeting, I know what the goal is, do you think it's time for a raise or any change in salary?
Thank you.
So I think there's sort of an informal process, but no, we don't do large public hearings.
Does the Phoenix Commission contemplate cost of living increases? And if so, how are they calculated? Does the Consumer Price Index factor into the recommendations at all?
So we give them, part of the data we give them before the meeting is the urban CPIU for, I believe we use just the Phoenix area CPI. I have it right here, let me look. And yeah, it's just for the Phoenix Mesa area, so our census area. And we give them that number and show what it's been over the last 10 years or so. As an indication of how has cost of living changed in the region. But no, otherwise, besides that piece of data, they don't necessarily figure a cost of living increase into the discussion formally, I guess. And the other thing is our charter, the way this section of the charter is written that created this commission in the 70s, it very specifically says that, you know, the commission has one option, which is to fill in the blank on how much is the salary for the mayor and then how much would be the salary for city council members. So they couldn't make a recommendation to say, we want it to set at this dollar level with, increases annually or something. There's no way to do that in the charter.
And if there is some consideration given to a cost of living increase, there is no specific formula.
No, there is not. They weigh many factors, including cost of living, but many others.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? And there's no cap on the increase that they provide or that they recommend?
No, as Sam indicated, it really is just to fill in the blank. They have power to set it based on all the factors that we've discussed and many more. They have the power to increase. They also have the power to decrease. They just give us a number that goes on the ballot.
The follow-up, well, this next question may be somewhat redundant because you've addressed in some respects some factors to be considered, but what do you consider to be the key factors that are taken into consideration in reaching a recommendation?
Well, I think that this year particularly, I haven't staffed many of these over the years, but this year particularly, concern was with the status of the city's budget and the environment in terms of the city employees' compensation. Those two factors, I think, were perhaps the most important to the commission members. They also asked questions related to other benefits besides salary. They wanted to understand the financial value of those other benefits. And in Phoenix, we have, for elected officials, the options that they choose from. And there is deferred compensation, health benefits if they elect to have them, a car allowance and phone allowance. So there are a number of factors, there are compensation items that are not in the salary number, and that is something that the commission is very interested in knowing this year as well. There usually is talk about how hard they work, how many community meetings they have to spend, how many hours a day they devote to their duties. Those are important factors to them. But those are the ones that we heard this year. They may have lots of other things on their minds that they don't share, but that's what we heard.
Okay, great. Are there any specific lessons learned or any experiences that we can learn from, or more importantly, any advice that you have to share that might assist us in our work? After 16 years, I'm sure there's plenty.
I can tell you, talking with someone else who staffs this and staffed it for times we've done it, I think one of the things that we hope the commission does, and they seem to do every year naturally, is weigh all of this information together, but realize that there is no formula, there is no purely right answer, and part of the commission's job is to represent their own views, but also the views of their community members, and taking all of that together, coming to what they feel is the right thing to do. So I don't think they think there is a purely right answer out there, and we certainly as staff do not want to get involved in encouraging an answer of any kind, but I think they've seen that there's no perfect formula for how to make this work. I think the other thing is 10 years ago was the last increase, so it's been a while.
I'm sorry, did you say 10 years ago?
What's that?
I'm sorry, did you say 10 years ago?
Yeah, 10. 1-0. So that 10 years ago, the voters approved a salary increase. 2 years after that, there was another recommendation for an increase, which was rejected by the voters. And so I think that's the other thing, is that they have felt, I think, it was a very close election that time, but they've still felt like this isn't maybe the right, it still doesn't feel like the right time given everything that's happening in the economy. So we've had no recommendation for the last 6 years, I guess it is, and we'll see how it goes in 2 years from now. But so I think generally, even in the previous years, there isn't a perfect formula. I think it takes just a little bit of guessing and rounding, because, for example, one of the things they've not asked us for is comparing exact apples-to-apples comparison between all cities. Because, for example, the number we publicize on our salary is the one set in charter, and it doesn't include benefits. But I know through the research that cities of all kinds do various kinds of calculations. Some include benefits, some don't have any benefits, some don't include the benefits they do offer. So I think that's something that there's no perfect way to ever get that data. So we look more at the trends. Anyway, that's my advice.
Yeah, I think that, for us, the charter is pretty specific, but we do endeavor to assemble a balanced group. There's only 7, but we try and have that group be balanced and reflective of the community. And it's also really important to understand our charter does not give the council any authority over the recommendation. The recommendation is made. If it is for an increase, it goes directly to the ballot. Mayor and council cannot say, no, we'd really rather you didn't. That is not an option. They cannot participate in that process. It goes straight from the commission to the voters. And as Sam said, sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. Really depends on the environment.
Thank you for that. You anticipated my follow-up question, because I didn't realize that recommendations of the commission went directly to the voters. Okay, that's helpful. Do you have any recommendations for our team of staff persons that are essentially doing the lion's share of the work in terms of things that they may be cognizant of, or things that you would recommend that they pay particular attention to?
Well, Sam has done a lot of research on compensation around the country, and he'd be willing to share with you what he dug up, and you guys can judge whether that's consistent with what you are interested in, what kind of information you're interested in. Sam, did you want to add anything?
No, I think I sent to Tom, but I can send again for definitely, I think it was a couple months ago, and this is regarding for you, but sort of what agenda packet we use and all the data we provide. We also just recently published the minutes from our meeting this year in March. So, happy to share all of that, of course. But yeah, it's, I wish this commission luck and staff luck, and it's not an easy process, and I think it weighs on our commission members' minds too, because they care about the council members, and they know that it's not an easy job, but they also know that the voters, especially in Arizona, tend to be a little more conservative, and going to the voters with a increase would, in this environment today and in the foreseeable future, would be difficult.
Right. I think that I mentioned earlier that the compensation of the employees, city employees, was a factor that weighed very heavily on some of them. Our city employees had given concessions, salary concessions, in the budget cycle just prior to this group being convened. And so giving the elected officials an increase in the face of that, I think, was really difficult for our folks to get comfortable with.
Very good. Rory?
I had a quick question. I'm Rory McGinnis, one of the staff members. In terms of the commission getting to a recommendation, does the commission write a report that gets submitted? And does the commission make recommendations and the staff write that report? How do you typically do that?
Well, Pam said the minutes for the one meeting were just finalized and are posted. And there is not a report per se, but the chairman of the commission transmits the recommendation of the commission to the city clerk, I believe. via a letter. It's a letter. It can be very detailed, but it's not what I would consider a report.
No, in the last couple, because there's been no recommendation, has been just one page saying, given all the factors we considered, and it names some of those from budget concerns to, various other things, Great Recession. It generally has named those things and then said we recommend no increase. Thank you. Best of luck.
Sounds good.
And just one other follow-up question. So if there's no increase that the commission recommends, there's no need for it to go to the ballot? Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
Anything else? Are there any from commissioners? Okay. Very good. If there's nothing further, thank you all very, very much for your time
Thank
today.
you for having been delightful. I wish you the very in your study and efforts. And if you need anything else, give Sam a call.
Certainly will. Smart woman.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you again for your time and for all your valuable information. We certainly will be in touch if there's a need.
Great. Thanks.
Great. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
You too.
Technology worked.
Yes, it did.
Very impressive. Yeah.
Hats off to our technology team and the rest of the staff that put this together. A phenomenal job. Still would have appreciated the opportunity to make the run to Phoenix, but anyway. It is what it is.
If I may just say, Mr. Chair,
Please.
before we transition to the next item,
Certainly.
for Phoenix to have that long history of their commission and this being our first time, I feel pretty good about where we are and the approach we've decided to take as, being kind of the novice group in this effort. So I think they confirmed a lot of what we were thinking in terms of the information we would need and the process that's been laid out. So that was reassuring.
Very much so. And for what it's worth, both Governing Magazine and I believe several other human resources organizations have rated Phoenix extremely highly. They've been, by Governing Magazine, an A+ rated city for at least the last 10 to 15 years or beyond. And I know SHRM and a few other organizations have rated them very highly in terms of their human resources management. So if that's any indication of the validity of their work, then I think a lot of what we've gotten from them is going to be a great value to us. I agree wholeheartedly that the conversation has been very reassuring. Very good. Well, obviously we've had a lot of discussion with regard to the Consumer Price Index, but unlike Phoenix, we are obligated to utilize a particular formulary in determining the CPI component of our recommendation. And to that end, I thank our staff persons who were able to work with Dr. Lafayette to assist us with gaining a better understanding and getting our arms around the whole CPI issue. So with that in mind, Dr. Lafayette, if you're prepared, sir, we're ready for you and we're all ears.
Okay, thanks so much. Do I have a marker? A marker? Okay, thank you. I don't need this right away, so I'll just, in the interest of your time, plow ahead. So, as you all know, the city charter ties officials' compensation changes to the Consumer Price Index. And so I've been asked to share some background on the CPI, what it measures, how it's calculated, which CPI you should use to benchmark compensation, and how you need to do it. The CPI is actually one of a variety of alternative ways to measure inflation, which is a process of constantly rising prices. In other words, continuously declining value of money. In inflation, a dollar doesn't buy as much as it did before. So the whole point of cost of living pay increases is to give the worker the same purchasing power as what he or she had before inflation hit. And the CPI is designed to measure inflation and how much the dollar's purchasing power has changed between two specific periods. So the CPI is constructed by measuring the price of a predefined basket of goods and services at a particular time and place. And the CPI is actually based on the prices of 211 different goods and services in 38 places. So each month, that means that 8,018 prices are collected and then used to construct the Consumer Price Index. And the prices of the items are weighted to approximate the purchasing patterns of a typical household. And we'll come back to that point later because that's kind of important. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who are the magicians doing all this work, survey consumers' purchases to figure out what the correct weights ought to be. And the result of that survey is the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which is extremely useful in its own right. But then it goes to inform the CPI. So the CPI, or any price index, is set up to show the path of price changes over time. And you set the price level at a specific date, which is called the base date, to a particular value. And the value that you set the prices to at the base date is usually 100. And it's 100 in the CPI, but it doesn't have to be. So the value of the index at the base date is usually 100, but it's arbitrary. And the date that you choose as your base date is also arbitrary. It literally does not matter. So the index value in each following month is based on the change in the value of the basket relative to its value in the base month. So, thanks, sir. Say the value of the basket at your base date, I'm clicking into college professor mode here, is $1,000. And that's its value at the base date. And so then your price index at the base date is by definition 100. So say the following month you go out and you value this basket again, and its value has risen to $1,002. So the value of your index is the current month's price divided by the base date price times the value of the index, the initial value of the index. So what you've got is 1,002 over 1,000 times 100. And so the value of the index in that second month is 100.2. See that? By the following year, then, say that the price of the basket's increased to $1,050. So the index is going to be 1,050 divided by 1,000 times 100, or 105. In other words, you need $1,050 to buy the same things that $1,000 got you the year before. So how does this relate to the inflation rate? The inflation rate, it turns out, is really easy to calculate from the CPI. You typically measure inflation from 1 year to the next or 1 month to the next. But when you measure inflation from 1 month to the next, you typically convert it to an annualized rate. So you calculate inflation as the percentage change in the price index between your first and second date. So what you've got is, if you let I sub 2 equal the index at the second date, you got I sub 2 minus I sub 1, the value of the index at the first date, divided by I sub 1. And you can simplify that to I sub 2 over I sub 1 minus 1. And in this case, you've got 105 over 100 minus 1, and so inflation is 5%. Okay? So you can actually then calculate inflation between any two dates. Let's do this. So the CPI in March 2013 was 232.773. In March 2014, it was 236.293. And in March 2015, it was 236.119. So inflation between March 2013 and March 2014 was 236.293 divided by 232.773 minus 1, or 1.5%. Now, in 2015, something interesting happened. The index went down. We had negative inflation. And so you do the same thing. It's 236.119 divided by 236.293 minus 1, or which turns out to be a negative 0.07%, slightly less than 0.1%. And so you calculate average inflation for a year the same way. It's just that you use the average value of the CPI over the year instead of this month-specific CPI that I use here. Now, you asked me whether there is more than one CPI. Yes, there are 10,614 CPIs. And these different CPIs fall into several major groups. One group depends on the type of the consumer. So the index that the Phoenix folks were talking about, and the most common index, is called the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, which is abbreviated to CPI-U. There's also another group of CPIs that pertain only to urban wage and clerical workers, the Consumer Price Index for urban wage and clerical workers, which is CPI-W. And so the difference between the CPI-U and the CPI-W is really just the weighting of the items the prices of the items in the basket, based on the purchasing patterns of lower income workers versus all workers. Another breakdown of this different types of CPIs is the breadth of the basket being considered. There's a group of indices that consider all items. That's what we've been talking about. And then there are indices that consider various subsets of the basket. So you have different general groups of goods and services. So you have CPIs measuring just food, or just energy, or just services, or just healthcare. And then you have a very large number of CPIs that measure very specific items. For example, there is a CPI that measures price changes in men's pants and shorts. That's how specific it gets. And then there are other CPIs that can be really useful that actually exclude groups of items. The most common of these, the one that's most often used, is the CPI, all items less food and energy. And this is called the core CPI. And the idea of doing that is that the price of food and energy is very volatile. And so if you take those items out, what you're left with is goods and services whose prices are more stable over time. And so you get a sense of what's going on in the underlying economy, pulling this noisy factor out. So people use that a lot.
Can I interrupt very quickly?
Beg pardon?
May I interrupt you just
Sure.
very quickly? Does the CPI-U include energy and food costs or not?
It does.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Well, the CPI-U all items. So you can have the CPI-U excluding food and energy. That whole class of CPIs is called CPI-U. And that's all urban consumers versus urban wages.
So you can also have a core CPI-U as well.
Correct.
I see.
And of course CPI-W.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
Another breakdown of, I'm sorry.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is this a national figure, or does it also break down on a regional or a?
It does.
Okay.
It can.
But the CPI-U that you're talking about is a national number?
Can be.
Okay.
You can have regional and local CPIUs.
Like Lafayette,
The
you saw
whole
the
class is called the CPIU. Another breakdown is seasonally adjusted versus not seasonally adjusted. And seasonal adjustment takes account of price changes that recur regularly at specific times each year. One example I thought of off the top of my head was the price increase in gasoline that you usually see about this time of the year when refineries are switching from their winter blend to their summer blend. So a price increase in gasoline now means less than it means at other times of the year, just because you expect that to happen. It almost always happens. And so a seasonally adjusted price index would pull that out. You can also have seasonally adjusted employment that does the same thing. And seasonal adjustment is just a statistical technique that removes those impacts formally. So another group of CPIs is geographic coverage, and this is the question you were getting to. There is the U.S. city average for the whole U.S. And then there are broad regions of the country. You can have a CPI for the Northeast, the Midwest, the South, and the West. And then you have CPIs for 25 metro areas, one of which, as you heard, is Phoenix, one of which is not Columbus. You also have CPIs that are based on the size of the metro area being considered. Size A is 1.5 million residents or more, and then you go down to size D, which is 50,000 residents or less. And then you have regions intersected with the region size. For example, you have the CPIU in the Midwest, size class A. We'll get back to that because that is, I think, your sweet spot. And then you have a series of 28 national level, what are called chain CPIs. Those are designed to address a problem with the traditional CPI, which is the next thing I want to get to. But any questions thus far? Okay. There are three main problems with the CPI that y'all ought to understand as you're using it to think about compensation. The first one is, as I said at the beginning, the market basket that the CPI uses is based on the purchasing patterns of a typical consumer. People in different places, different ages, different household types, different income levels spend differently. So the fine print of the CPI really needs to say your experience may vary. And the CPI for urban wage and clerical workers is a stab at addressing the problem, but not much. The second problem is changes in quality of the underlying goods. The CPI includes a TV, but at some point that TV changed from black and white to color. And at some point it changed from a color set with a picture tube to a flat screen high definition TV. And so the pace of change in the goods that you're measuring then can mess with the validity of the CPI over time. Consider how fast computers change. So each change in technology likely results in an increase in price, and that would result in an increase in the CPI. But households probably wouldn't see it that way simply because the new good delivers so much more satisfaction than the old good delivered. And people over the years have experimented with ways to address this problem. But the thing is that the fixes that they suggest, things like a hedonic CPI, stuff like that, are really difficult to implement in practice, and so nobody's gone anywhere with them. There's really not much you can do about it. But the message, the bottom line, is simply that you have to be careful when you're looking at price changes over long periods, even 4 years, because your basket has fundamentally but qualitatively changed. So there is unfortunately not much you can do about it, just be aware of the problem. Second problem with the CPI is that purchasing patterns shift over time. Tastes change, new goods appear, expenditure shares change. And that means that the weights on the prices used to calculate the CPI become less relevant over time. Now, in the standard CPI, as I say, it's all based on the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which comes out monthly, but every 2 years, BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, looks at the change in consumer expenditure patterns and adjusts the weights. So they do take into take that into account, but only with a lag. A related problem is that substitutions of one good or one service for another also happen a whole lot more dynamically as the price of goods and services shift relative to one another. So the classic example is if the price of margarine goes up and the price of butter goes down, people buy less margarine, more butter. If the price of movies go up, fewer people go to movies and more people go bowling. So the fact that the price of margarine and movies went up obviously influences people's purchasing decisions, but once those purchasing decisions are made and people substitute away from the more expensive good or service, the fact that the price went up becomes irrelevant because it's not in their basket anymore. And that means that the CPI, based on a fixed basket of goods and services, overstates the actual financial impact of changing prices on households because the substitution's going on back and forth. And the chained CPI is a response to the second and third problem, not the problem of the change in quality of goods. Yeah, Rory.
Just one quick question. You said the CPI on a fixed basket overstates, what was the? Overstates
inflation. Actually, it overstates the impact of changing prices on people's budgets. You see that? Mm-hmm. So the chained CPI is calculated just like the regular CPI, except the weights the weights on the prices of goods and services change not every 2 years, but they change every month based on the results of the monthly consumer expenditure survey. And so because that chain CPI is based on the consumer expenditure survey month after month after month, it's going to include the impact of households' attempt to minimize the impact of rising prices because it will see that shift from margarine to butter and movies to bowling. And because of that, you expect inflation as measured by the chained CPI to be lower than the inflation measured by the traditional CPI. And it usually is. So the chained inflation rate from March 2013 to March 2014 was 1.4%. The traditional CPI said 1.5. The chained inflation rate from March 2014 to March 2015 was minus 0.4%, not minus 0.07%. So, and that sounds just great. I mean, it sounds like what we really need. In fact, the Simpson-Bowles Commission on Deficit Reduction recommended that the federal government switch from the CPIU to the chained CPIU to set Social Security benefits. Although it was much more because the Social Security Administration would be paying out less money than it was. That this is a more theoretically preferable way to do it. Cynical folks that they are. There is a very practical problem with the chained CPI, and this is why I don't necessarily recommend that you use the chained CPI. And that is the fact that the chained CPI values come out very quickly. They come out with all the others about 3 weeks after the end, 2 to 3 weeks after the end of the month, CPI for that month is out. But the Consumer Expenditure Survey comes out with generally about a 9-month lag. And so the chain CPI really can incorporate the values or the insights gained from the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which is what it's advertised to do, until about 9 months to a year after the fact. And so the recent values of the chain CPI are provisional, preliminary. And so what you have to think about is how you're going to reflect that if you use the chain CPI. We'll get to that in a moment. Turns out that there are a whole bunch of different ways of measuring inflation in addition to the CPI. There's the Producer Price Index, there's the Gross Domestic Product Implicit Price Deflator, there's the CPI, or a price index actually based on wages. But for your purposes, the CPI really probably is the best. I understand, though, that it's supposed to be based on a 4-year average. And that 4-year average is apparently set in stone. And if I were king of Columbus, I would change that. Because I think that's a really, really bad idea. It actually makes pay escalation unresponsive to changes in inflation. It makes that pay escalation what economists call sticky. So if inflation increases, wage adjustments increase much more slowly, and public officials wind up losing purchasing power. You'll see this in a bit when I give you what's been going on with CPI lately. If inflation declines, the officials obviously make out, but the city winds up paying out more in real terms. Basing this on a 4-year average winds up being unfair to everybody, and I'm very sorry that it was set up that way. Which of the 10,614 CPIs should we use? It really is better to go with an all-items index rather than one that excludes food and energy, the core CPI. Core CPI is obviously more stable, but in real life, public officials have to buy food and energy, so it's kind of unfair to say, well, we're not going to adjust your wage for food and energy. The chain CPI is at least theoretically better, but you have to be comfortable with ambiguity. Because what's going to happen is you're going to calculate your inflation rate for the past year, 1/4 of your wage adjustment, and that's going to be wrong. It's going to change. So you have to decide how you're going to handle that. Do you retroactively adjust people's pay because you based it on an incorrect rate to start with, or do you just leave it alone? And I can't tell you that. You have to tell me that. In any case, if you're going to do this, you have to be very careful to set a date on which you go out and retrieve the chain CPI value to avoid any conflict later on. That's not important with the CPIU, because something I didn't mention is that once the CPI, the regular CPIU comes out, it's done. It's not revised. Unlike just about everything else that comes out of BLS, the CPI values are for good once they're issued. If you're going to use an annual average inflation rate, you have to use the not seasonally adjusted CPI, because an annual average of a seasonally adjusted rate has no meaning. And if you're measuring inflation year over year, even in a particular month, as I did back there, that needs to be done with the unadjusted numbers as well for theoretical reasons. And as I said earlier, there's no CPI for Columbus, but there are for Cincinnati and Cleveland. I really don't recommend, I never recommend that people use Cincinnati or Cleveland for Columbus, though, because the demographics and the economies of Cincinnati and Cleveland are different from those that we have here. Purchasing patterns are likely to be different. I usually use the CPI for all urban consumers, Midwest size class A, and that's what I recommend you use. It's not perfect, but it does incorporate the purchasing behavior of Midwesterners, and it does include Columbus information, at least in the background, to a much greater extent than the national CPI does. So that is my recommendation. And I was asked to calculate the average inflation for my recommended rate for the last 4 years. So the CPI values and inflation rates were as follows. 2010, 208,575. 2011, 215, 155. 2012, 219, 409. 2013, 222, 562. 2014, 225, 658. And so your inflation for 2011 was 3.15%. For 2012, it was 1.98. For 2013, it was 1.44. And for 2014, it was 1.39. And so the 4-year average is 1.99%, which is a whole lot more than the 1.39 if you were allowed just to base it on last year's inflation. So our public officials, God bless their hearts, are making out.
Sorry, what was that 4-year average?
The 4-year average was 1.99%.
Could you repeat again what your recommendation is? You said it was the CPI.
The Consumer Price Index, all urban consumers, Midwest size A. And I am going to put all this out in a write-up for you. And in that write-up, I will show you, I will take screenshots how to go to the BLS website and retrieve the data. So
You anticipated our next question. That's good.
I'm good.
Yes, you are.
So,
And very modest as well.
it's honest, it's not modest. Okay, back to business. I am going to get difficult for a minute here. And that, my bit of difficulty, is that when you're calculating the average of percentages, you can't really do it just by adding these up and dividing by 4, the arithmetic average. You have to do it using what's called a geometric average. And the reason for that is simply that if your index declines, or if it declines by 1% from year 1 to year 2, and then it rises by 1% year 2 to year 3, the arithmetic average would say your average change is 0, but you're not back to where you started from because that second 1% was calculated on a lower amount. And a geometric average handles that. Here's how to do it. It's 1 plus the first year rate times 1 plus the second year rate times 1 plus the third year rate times 1 plus the fourth year rate the whole thing taken to the 0.25 power. In other words, the fourth root of that thing.
We're all over it.
Oh, yeah.
You have staff to do it.
Notice these pens are stationary.
I already know how to do
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about this.
No,
I really am. But it makes a whole lot more difference if you have negative and positive percentage changes than if you have just positive like we have here. Negative inflation over a year is rare, but it does happen, as you saw earlier, and it did happen in 2009. So if you, this is the CPI-U Midwest A. If you use the national CPI, what you get is 3.16 here, 2.07 there, 1.46 here, and 1.62 there. And so the 4-year average using the national CPI is 2.08. Not a big difference, but a difference. So again, I simply recommend that you use the Midwest rate. So that is what I wanted to share. Questions, comments, witticisms?
Just a question. Were this commission to pick one of these CPI rates, how often do they change or go away or stop being calculated? Or once the CPI-U size A Midwest is calculated, is it just, has it been calculated ongoing, or does it go away after a while?
Oh, no. The national CPI goes back to the 60s. This one, the Midwest size A goes back at least a couple decades. So the BLS says, well, it could happen, but we'll give you lots of warning if it does. And actually, the BLS has a really, really nice page talking specifically about how you use the CPI to set wage escalations, and I will attach that to the write-up that I give you. It essentially tells you some of what I just told you.
In light of the fact that Section 15-4 of our charter requires that this commission provides a salary recommendation that includes the annual cost of living adjustment that does not exceed the average increase of the consumer price index during the preceding 4 years. And I realize that you have a concern with the preceding 4 years, but
Okay.
in
Well,
light of that, I think we're very fortunate to have had Central Ohio's leading expert on the subject to provide this level of detail and specificity. And I think I speak for all the commissioners in saying that we have a significantly more thorough understanding of the CPI, the various types of CPI, which frankly in and of itself was information for me, because I didn't realize that we had as many different CPIs as exist. So, we certainly will take your recommendations into significant consideration as we reach some determination here. Any other questions, any clarification? Please.
One more question. If we take your recommendation, it seems that those numbers are annual, and so as opposed to if we did the chain, it would be, we would have to pick a date. So for these, we don't need to pick a specific date
No.
for calculations.
No, because the reason why you have to pick a specific date for the chain CPI is that those numbers change.
Okay.
These don't.
Okay.
They're set in stone. So whenever you go out and gather them, you gather them. But in any case, you will want to be very specific that it is the CPIU Midwest size Class A annual average. So that's what you would need to specify. And that's good enough.
And
Any
then-
follow-up questions later on, certainly I'm happy to answer those.
In the interest of accuracy, we're going to ensure that between yourself and staff, that you'll handle all the calculations.
It'll be a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you again very much, Dr. Lafayette.
Thank you very much.
I think as Dr. Lafayette alluded to, whether or not that 4-year average is something that may not necessarily be the fairest way in which we would calculate the average increase. Nonetheless, we're obligated by charter to do so. I think that there's still some question as to exactly how we determine what that 4-year average should be. And I believe that during one of our last meetings, we needed some further clarification from our city attorney in terms of how that 4-year average should be interpreted. And I've no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Mr. Cox is chomping at the bit to provide additional clarity and set us on the appropriate course.
Where's my marker?
Dr. Lafayette still has it. So.
I think you have to look at that issue, you have to look at that 4-year average issue in relation to the general provision in Section 15 that talks about salaries not being increased or diminished during the term for which the individual was elected or appointed. So if we're looking at the different ways to read that language, you have to ask the question, is it possible to have a formula that sets that salary going forward, or does the commission have to say it's got to be X percent based on the 4 prior years to this commission making its recommendation? And we have nothing to, this is new to the city charter, so I looked at similar provisions that are in the Ohio Constitution prohibiting interim salary increases, and there's a body of case law that addresses some of those provisions, and it does provide some level of clarity as to in terms of whether that's a formula process is permissible. There was a 1983 Ohio Supreme Court case that, and I won't go too far into the weeds on this, but it dealt with the municipal clerk of court's salary which is set by state statute, and there's a ceiling that was in place for those salaries that was dependent on the county clerk of court's salary. Well, the legislature changed that, how you determine that salary. So the question was, if that ceiling went up due to an act of the legislature, could the municipal clerk take the interim increase? Was that a violation of the interim increase prohibition? And the court looked at some of its prior decisions, which I think are helpful as well. And one of them was a 1942 case that talks about the common pleas judges' salaries, and it educated me in terms of how those salaries are set. And I think let me just read one sentence out of that decision. The court found that a statute effected before the commencement of a term of a common pleas judge, whereby his compensation is automatically increased during his term by reason of the increase of the population of his county, as shown by a later federal census, is not in conflict with Section 14, Article 4 of the Constitution, which provides that the compensation of a judge of the common pleas court shall not be diminished or increased during his term of office. So you have a common pleas court salary, judge's salary, that is determined by the population of that county. That county population changes, obviously. So the question is, could that, during his term, that population increases to put it in a different salary category? Was that prohibited by the interim increase? And the court said no. Going back to the municipal clerk court's case, the court found that when a statute setting forth the formula for the compensation of an officer is effective before the commencement of the officer's term, any salary increase which results from a change in one of the factors used by the statute to calculate the compensation is payable to the officer. Such increase is not in conflict with Section 20, Article 2 of the Constitution when paid to the officer while in term. So taking those Supreme Court decisions together, I think it's clear that those similar provisions in the state constitution which prohibit interim increases allow for a formula to be used so long as the formula is set prior to the individual's commencement of their term. So then going back to our charter provision, the question is, what's the preceding 4 years referencing? Is it 4 years prior to the commission's report?
What triggers it, basically, is the question.
Yeah, or is it 4 years for each annual increase, the preceding 4 years? And Ken and I have talked about this. I think that the only way that makes sense is if it's 4 years prior to each annual increase, because otherwise you're looking at, somebody who starts this commission sets terms for, or makes recommendations for salaries for terms starting in 2018. Midway through that term, if you're looking back to 4 years prior to 2015, you're looking at data that's really has no bearing whatsoever on current, the purpose of the whole cost of living adjustment, which is, what's your purchasing power today, and what's the relevant.
So it's the 4 years prior to the beginning of the term, rather than the 4 year period before the date you set it.
Well, I think you could read it that way, but I think it also it's referencing the annual increases. Right. So the preceding 4 years, each year you're looking at an annual increase. Okay. When you're making that adjustment, what were the 4 prior years CPI average?
In other words, a rolling CPI.
4 years prior to each year.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. So for instance, if the commission is setting the salary for the mayor in 2018, the previous 4 years would be 17, 16, 15, and 14.
Right.
Yes. And then the next year would just be 1 year higher, right?
And then further outline his point, if we use Dr. Lafayette's numbers here and the average, the 4 years prior to this meeting includes 2010. We are going to be likely making recommendations in the future, which may not begin until 2018, which the first annual increase based on a CPI average wouldn't come until 2019.
Why would
So-
it include 2010 here?
If we took the 4-year average prior to the meeting of this commission,
Right,
which is 2015,
right.
we would have to go back to 2010 there to figure out the 4-year average change in the CPI, which is why we're recommending, based on case law, Josh's presentation here, that you would not necessarily do that. It would be the rolling 4 years prior to that increase. I'm looking at your body language. I think I'm actually confusing you rather than clarifying it.
And I don't know if I would use, maybe the term rolling is what's confusing. It's going to be established for each annual increase, I think, based on the 4 years prior to that annual increase. I think that's the way to, the only way to read that.
Be 4 years prior to each year changes.
So I get that completely. I was stuck on the fact that we're
Well-
still including 2010. You got the averages for 14, 13, 12, and 11. Why do you need to include 2010 in your example?
To figure out the 2011 inflation.
Yeah.
Because 2011
Okay, I'm with
inflation is this divided by that.
I'm with you.
Right. And so if you were setting the CPI increase in 2019, you would be taking into consideration economic considerations of 2010, which would not be an especially practical way to determine what a cost of living increase would be in 2019.
Right. Taking into consideration essentially 18, 17, 16, and 15.
Correct. But the reason why we posed the question is because the way that the charter is written, it was not clear which preceding 4 years we should take into account. And to the point, we weren't sure that the Constitution would allow us to set an out-year increase based on a formula, because we will not know the actual dollar amount because it will change.
Yeah, yeah, and then all prior salary increase ordinances, at least since I've been around, have been, based on a sum certain.
Mhm.
It's X amount this year,
Right.
next year. So the question is, could you use a formula in interpreting that section? And I think the answer is yes. The devil's in the details, identifying what index you're going to be using and who makes that determination and when. But it is, I think, legally permissible.
Looking at the language in the charter, is the 4-year average, is that a ceiling? Or
Yes.
So it could be the annual average unless it exceeds, or as long as it stays underneath that
Yes.
4-year average. So we could use the annual CPI. Wait, I'm getting confused, sorry. It's a ceiling?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so we could do less than that.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
So for purposes of the work of this commission, if we were to accept Dr. Lafayette's recommendation, the cap of the increase that we could recommend for all of the elected officials is 1.99%.
If you were making a decision on 2016 pay,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
solely on cost of living or the CPI, and you were just going to take the base today and add the 4-year preceding average of the CPI, yes, it would be a 1.9.
But you say if we were to only to look at the CPI, that's our cap. So no matter what we look at and what we consider, if we were setting for 16, whatever we consider, wouldn't the cap be 1.99% if we follow?
The CPI.
No. The way that the charter is written and what the charge is to set the base rate for each elected official. The increase past that base rate is what is capped at the 4-year average of the CPI. The reason why that was contemplated was because there are 4 years in between compensation commissions. The purpose would be that the compensation commission could set a base pay based on circumstances beyond the CPI and cost of living, changes in the market, taking into account historical gaps, whatever. But that in the out years in between meetings of the commissions, that there would be a function to give elected officials an increase in pay based on real economic circumstances. And that's where the CPI comes into account. So essentially if you only wanted to use the CPI as a basis for change, I suppose you could look at the average 4 years increase in the CPI to set your base, your new base, and then peg any annual increase thereafter based on the preceding 4-year average increase of the CPI, if the only factor you wanted to take into account was cost of living increases.
It's as clear as mud. Just so you know. Okay.
I don't know if I keep talking, it makes it any better.
Nope.
Yeah. Getting at the reason why the original Charter Commission put this method in place was so that you weren't going 4 years in between any potential increase, and that there were obviously changes in economic circumstances in those 4 years. And the fairest way to contemplate any potential increase in those years was to peg it to the CPI.
Does somebody have the proposed, or the charter language before them? They can just read to me. I think that would help.
Section 15.4.
Mm-hmm.
Within 3 months of appointment, the commission shall submit to the city clerk a report of recommendations for the salary of each elective officer of the city, including an annual cost of living adjustment which shall not exceed the average increase in the Consumer Price Index or successor thereto during the preceding 4 years. If the commission fails to timely submit the report, the council may compel a meeting of the commission to prepare and submit the same.
Thank you. That is very helpful. Got it.
Makes a lot of sense.
So I think just to sum up my position, what is the preceding 4 years referencing? It's referencing the annual increase. So each annual increase in the preceding 4 years before that increase. Because I don't think that was, we have 2 Charter Commission members here. I don't think that issue was specifically discussed in the commission meeting. So it's,
I don't recall.
I think so. So just so I can have a clear understanding of it, so the job of, our job is to recommend a base salary for each of these positions and a annual increase for the years until the next commission.
yes.
But that increase is capped at what the preceding 4 years Consumer Price Index says it is.
Right.
Or your average.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Just stop talking while we're at it.
You got it exactly right.
Moving on.
And if it makes you feel any better, this is weeks worth of conversations
Right.
on the part of staff to try and get to a place where we understand it. You're all being presented this information just now for the first time, so it's not easy to decipher.
Or at least on the right track.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Attorney Cox, thank you very much for that. And we'll be expecting that opinion in writing here within the next, day or two. Obviously, our staff's been very diligently collecting additional data from the 29 cities that we've asked them to benchmark. Mr. Beaverson is likewise chomping at the bit to give us an update on,
Sir, I'm ready to go.
on that work. So without any further delay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, in front of you, you have an updated survey response table. 21 of our 29 cities we surveyed were kind enough to respond to us for a 72% response rate. As of yesterday, close of business, we closed our survey. Completely up to you, obviously. If we receive any more results after that, we of course won't turn those results away. If you would like us to incorporate those, those are certainly very easy to do. Of the 8 cities who did not respond, I have the list. If you care to hear it, it's Atlanta, Baltimore, Cleveland, El Paso, Indianapolis, Minneapolis, San Antonio, and Toledo.
To tag team with Mr. Beaverson, keeping in line of giving you 2 different sets of spreadsheets every time you come to a meeting. The second set of spreadsheets that you have there reflects all the responses, so the 21 that were spoken of. But in addition, the charge was put forth at the last meeting to also go out and proactively seek, either through independent research or interviews of other officials within the cities we were looking at, additional information. Our legislative research office has spent the past 7 to 10 days actually calling each of the cities that had not responded originally and have gathered substantially more information. The reason why we have the difference in that is to simply distinguish the difference between the self-responses and self-reporting of the cities versus the responses that we've got by calling. That said, we can document all the sources and the conversations, interviews, or exchanges with those cities. And what you'll have is a substantially more complete listing of what I would say is probably the most critical information. It may not be every column, but for instance, for mayor and for council, you will see dollar amounts and base amounts for every city contemplated, so all 29 cities. It became more difficult when it got down to city attorney and the auditor. In some cases, that was because those cities don't necessarily have an auditor or a comptroller or a city attorney. They may have a law director. For instance, we ran into some cities that didn't have an independent auditor, but rather an auditor which was in the Department of Finance, but had independent authority of the finance director. In other words, there are various different reasons why those numbers might be more difficult to find. That said, I think Mr. Beaverson, myself, LRO staff, all staff are committed that if we get additional information that comes in, we'll continue to refine it, add to it, and improve it to have the best data set possible. But I think both on Greg's 72%, I believe that's what he said, self-response rate and the additional information that we were able to glean through interviews and independent research online, we've got a really good data set to now begin analyzing.
Obviously, we need to, each of the commissioners need to begin to think about what of this data is most relevant. And obviously there's an awful lot of information here to digest. I think what would also be very helpful would be for staff to determine how best to analyze that data in such a way that it's of value to us when we meet again, and to help us to digest a significant amount of information here and to come up with a recommendation that makes, well, number one is consistent with what you've been able to compile here and reflects some level of fairness, equity, and ultimately meets the objectives of the commission. There's an awful lot here. I don't know if you've given any initial thought to the best way to begin to attack the information that's here, or whether or not you've given any thought to how are you going to compile the information in such a way that it's something that we can, something that can be useful and of value to our overall analysis.
Definitely, Mr. Chairman. We've actually already begun doing some analysis in preparation for that same request. We knew that being able to look at this amount of data in maybe a more graphical, illustrative way will be much easier for you to decide on your task. So we have begun putting some things together and some thoughts. Certainly when we present those analyses to you, if you like what you see and you believe that that's something that's going to be able to help you make your decision, that's great. If you need to come back to us and ask us to refine that data any way or provide it to you in different ways, then certainly we're willing and able to do that.
Do you have any thoughts or recommendations for where we really begin to focus on? We've gotten a lot of information, so I think it would just be helpful to all of us to, if there are specific areas that you think are more relevant. There are 21 cities and several different categories in each, and just wanted to get a sense from you as to whether or not there are areas here that we should focus on more so than others.
Well, we have started having those conversations. The first step that we started with there was simple base salary. Let's make a comparison with the base salary of other elected officials in other cities and see where that is. So obviously we thought that would be something that you would be interested in. In terms of, again, graphically presenting it, it might be more difficult and actually a little more confusing to put 2 or 3 or 4 variables all into one chart or table. So that's where those future decisions will come in on how many different ways to present the data to you. And I don't mean to be vague. I'm not trying to do that right now, but essentially, to answer your question, we've started talking about it, but other than the base salary, I don't have anything else to let you know about now.
Essentially, we spent the past week as additional data came in, starting to play with it, for lack of a better term, and organize it in different ways. And in doing so, I think came across different questions we're asking ourselves of how we arrange the information. And I think we're starting to see that some of the categories of information that we collected are probably going to be less relevant to how we arrange the information. And depending on which office, it may be more or less relevant. For instance, cities that have or do not have a city manager is more relevant to the conversation of salary around the mayor. It's not necessarily as relevant to the conversation around the salary of the city auditor or city attorney. Looking at the number of council members may be one way we slice and dice the data, so to speak. It broke out, interestingly, in sort of thirds, that there are about a third of councils that have, for lack of a better way of putting it, 0 to 10 council members. There is another third that has 10 to 20 council members, and then a few outliers that have more than 20 council members. It may or may not be a value to present the information based on council size. But I think to Greg's point that we will be looking at representing the data in many different ways, separately, to be able to present to you to start making some of those decisions.
At this point, then, our objective would be to just become somewhat more familiar with the data that's here. Correct. Until you are at a point where you're able to provide us a bit more specificity, and for you to do what you need to do with the data at hand, that gives us a bit more guidance and more direction. So the purpose of getting it to us in our hands today is essentially to become a bit more familiar with what we already have in place. not necessarily to draw any conclusions or anything along those lines.
I think we all feel that it's a little too early right now at this point to draw those conclusions. After we bring the analysis to you, we hope it will be much easier for you to do your job.
Perfect. Questions, commission members? Okay, very good. Well, obviously, we look very much forward to the additional analysis and your further review. And once we've established our next meeting date, I'm sure that'll be the lion's share of our focus.
Actually, I do have one question.
Yes, please.
Is there a way that we could get these Excel documents?
Sure.
Yeah, I had actually intended to send it out after this meeting, and, well, to your point, but to the point of the next part of the conversation, setting up the next meeting, to put them online also, because one of the things I think we heard from the commission was if we were going to have a public hearing, which is part of the next part of the conversation, having something for the public to react to might be good. We won't have recommendations at this point in time, but we will have a substantial amount of data that they would be able to view and look at their own.
Just one other question for those of us who are becoming increasingly more visually impaired. Is there any likelihood that the font on these may be just a tad larger?
Poster size.
We were actually working to get it smaller. No. Fit it on a business card. No. I think that is certainly something that we can do.
Thank you. Before we segue away from our responsibilities over the next several weeks, I think it would be beneficial for us to clarify a question that came up during I think our last meeting as to if in fact we are somewhat outside of the scope of what the charter suggests in terms of completing this task within a 3-month period. What are the consequences, or what exactly, how does that impact our timeline, essentially? And I think, Mr. Cox, you may have had some review of that and are prepared to share with us what jeopardy, if any, we were in.
Well, I haven't discussed this with the city attorney, but I think we could come to a plea agreement where you wouldn't have to serve more than 90 days. So, that's not, can't commit to that at this point, but I think you have to look what's that 3-month timeline in context of what the purpose of this report is. And I think, one, you start with the understanding that all elected officers' terms begin on January 1, so salaries for those officials have to be effective prior to the end of the year, prior to their term starting. Commission's appointed, second meeting in January, so there's certainly no, 3 months from that, there's certainly no need for council to have that report in April or May for that matter. And not that the 3 months is arbitrary. I mean, it says what it says, but keep in mind that you're doing this, you're making this report for the benefit of council. So I think, and particularly given that this is the first time we're going through this, not the 16th time, so we're trying to do it right and give due consideration to what factors to consider and all those types of issues that will hopefully not be as time consuming next time. But I think certainly it's council's call as to whether they think sorry, you got to have it done by April 30th, or do you want a more thorough, thoughtful report? And interestingly, the enforcement mechanism for not having a report is in section 15-4, and council can compel, if they think, hey, we really need to have this several months ahead of time, they can compel that report. So I don't think we're anywhere close to that point yet. So
for the time being, we're safe.
Yes.
I would just like to say thank you for that. And in reading 15-4, hearing Commissioner Tyler Lee read it, and it does say that council may compel, and it's permissive language and not mandatory language, I feel a lot better. So I don't think that we have any issues. So thank you. I think your analysis is on point. I think Commissioner Murray has something to say.
Mr. Chair, just a suggestion as we're having staff prepare draft recommendations and things. In light of the discussion that we had and the education that we had on the CPI, it seems like through conversation we've identified the CPI that we're the most comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fair to instruct them to use that as a working recommendation to prepare things around? I guess what I'm getting at is I feel like we've learned a lot. It's fresh in our heads. We've got one. If we make the recommendation, we don't have to revisit the 13,000 different kinds.
I have no discomfort with that whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I would entertain a motion to that effect.
All right. I'd like to move that the working definition of CPI would be the CPI-U size A Midwest annual as the definition for the CPI in chart, or something to that effect.
Is there a second to the motion? Okay, very good. We've heard the motion as stated by Commission Member Murdoch. Is there any unreadiness? Anyone have any discomfort with proceeding in that fashion?
I don't have any strong discomfort, but I think I would like to see or have the benefit of having Dr. Lafayette's report. He said he's going to submit what he presented. I'd like to have it in hand, but I don't have any discomfort. Certainly, most of what you said was, way up here. So I can't imagine I'm going to be in a position to challenge your recommendation. In fact, I do feel comfortable, but I would like the benefit of having reviewed his report, if that's okay.
And I think we can
and maybe be prepared at the next meeting to entertain a motion.
Okay, that's
fine.
fine.
Okay. I mean, if I can clarify, I was looking just to give instruction to the staff that they can start parting the waters and focus in on the one. So
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Very comfortable with that.
Okay. Very, very good. With that clarification, are we still comfortable with the motion as stated? Very good. And the clarification is that it is for purposes of providing direction to staff.
Correct.
Okay. With that in mind, all in favor of the motion will show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed of the same right, nay. Okay. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Let's see. Ken, is there anything else that we need to clarify in terms of timeframes or process or anything else?
Are we moving to item number 7 on the agenda? Or, okay. Yes, actually. I'm going to hand to Commissioner Murdoch, if he could pass around a copy. Essentially, the month of May calendar and some notes to consider.
Oh, will you pass these down?
I think we're good. I'll give one to Josh. I know he really wants to participate.
I'm sure it's on my.
Yeah, I'll expect you at all future meetings. In front of you have the month of May. Currently, in one of the points we should make so we can make sure that we public notice it. In fact, we're doing this, but we have tentatively scheduled a public hearing the morning of Wednesday, May 6th. When I confirm that is still on everyone's calendar. I had on my notes at 10 a.m., but there's still the option to change that time if that is not going to work. Essentially what that would serve as the first public hearing and opportunity for the public to come testify before this commission. In addition, as I just noted, we would have the data that's been given to you today available online in advance of that, and we would publicize that fact in the public notice so that people would have the opportunity to review that. Also have an opportunity for us to report out any new data that has come in before that date, give an overview of where the commission has come to this point, brief history for those who would be viewing at home. And also, there's an outside chance that we might have some initial views of how we've broken this data down to see if we're maybe on the right track. That remains to be seen and how much work we can get done between now and then. But moving from that point on, this is for the purposes of discussion, a proposed combined working meeting and public hearing the week of the 18th. The reason there would be that We could perhaps have a late afternoon meeting such as this, but that would then bleed into an evening houred public hearing where people could testify. In addition, I believe that there would be enough time between now and that date for real analysis and potential draft recommendations to be considered at the working meeting, which would then again give those wishing to testify something to respond to. The following week, which I fully understand is the week after Memorial Day, so that may come into play, if we had working recommendations or draft recommendations that were debated, discussed, based on analysis given, we may be able to actually vote and take action on those recommendations at a meeting the following week. That may be an aggressive timeline, but I chose to represent, for the sake of discussion, a more aggressive timeline, so that if we need to push it back, we could. One note to contemplate, that if we got to that point where the commission could vote on recommendations, that would clear the way for staff to then produce a final report. And I think there's some discussion already on what the format of that report would be, and certainly in the 3-4 weeks out that are forthcoming, we can take guidance from the commission and perhaps present reports that have been done by previous commissions. I do have the Phoenix report that was referenced earlier this meeting that I can give to you, thanks to Tom Diamond, before you leave today, but other commission reports as examples, and we can start to refine what that report would look like. The reason why that might be of important note to the commission members, there may not necessarily need to be a reason for the commission to reconvene after recommendations are voted on to accept a report. That might be something that we could do outside of the confines of a public meeting. Of course, we'll need to continue to confer with our city attorney and make sure that's the case, but the point is not lost on staff that you continue to convene past the original proposition that was made on your service, and we want to be respectful of your time, and if there's a way to get more rather than less work done outside of the confines of these meetings, we're going to try and do that. So open the floor for discussion, I guess, at this point.
Well, let's start with whether the 6th still works for everyone. And did we nail down a time? We said 10:30, was it? Because I remember us
10
going
o'clock.
back and forth.
I had in my notes at 10.
Okay.
I have it on my calendar as 10.
Yep.
Okay.
Is the intent for the May 6th meeting to just be the public hearing, or would we also have discussion and working meeting?
I thought it was just a public hearing.
Just the public hearing.
And there may be a brief introduction from the chair, perhaps reference staff to give a brief update how we got to that moment in time, but not an in-depth review of any information necessarily.
I just wanted to remind staff, I had a calendar from 10 to 11 because I had a commitment at 11:30. So
Correct.
I do have a hard stop on that day because I was contemplating only public hearing.
Yeah, we can keep any comments very brief at the beginning.
Yes.
And allow for upwards of an hour. And that'll be dictated essentially by the number of persons who have signed speaker slips and the like. And the intent is still to follow the basic format adopted at council meetings, where we allow for 3 minutes for any testimony by any particular individual who has signed a speaker slip.
Not to get too far into the weeds, but I might as well ask the question since we're here. We start at 10, something that the Charter Review Commission did, and some committee meetings at council leave the roll open, so to speak, or the ability for people to fill out speaker slips after the meeting starts. One option might be start at 10, leave the option to fill out speaker slips open until 10:15, 10:30, and then take speakers as they
Yeah, I think it's very reasonable.
Okay, we'll proceed with that assumption then. Thank you.
For the, pardon me, for the proposed combined working meeting and public hearing. first of all, let's look at which of the dates that are recommended here actually work for us. Are there any dates that do not work?
You're looking for a late afternoon into the early evening?
I think that's the intent, yes.
Okay.
I cannot do the 20th.
I can't do the 20th or the 21st.
It's the 19th potentially work for everyone?
I can too.
That could be a challenge for me. I could do a 5 o'clock start, which may be too late, or I could just join the meeting late if you choose to start earlier.
No, that's not the best day for me. I'd have to forego a meeting that I'd like to attend. So is there a reason Monday is not included in this?
Because that's when they have council.
It's council.
Oh, okay. So Monday's great for me. Okay.
And I know that we typically try to avoid, if possible, committing to a Friday for a host of reasons, not the least of which is it's probably not the best day in the world for a public hearing. But that being the case, I mean, if it's the only option, well,
Or we could just start at 5. I mean,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be an evening hearing, so it would just be a little bit, maybe we could do the hearing at whatever is a normal hearing time.
Yeah, I
for
guess
council, and then have our meeting after.
Yeah, I could, yes, that's. Thank you, Commissioner Easterday. It's a very good point, and logistically speaking, it may matter in your minds. It wasn't stated in the notes. I had contemplated that meeting actually being in council chambers.
right.
There's the ability to present the same information we would present to you in here in chambers, start at 5, and perhaps start taking speakers at 5:30 or even at the conclusion of whatever the presentation is. There's no reason why the meeting couldn't start at 5.
On what day?
On the 19th.
On the 19th.
Would that work with your schedule?
Yes.
And we would anticipate that being realistically a 2-hour meeting? Just trying to get a handle on the backside.
It certainly could be.
Okay, but that would more than likely be our ceiling.
Yeah. I think the furthest along the line that we would get would be a presentation on the data and the different ways that it's been broken down for consideration and discussion by the commission. There is the potential to actually have in front of you at least a framework of a recommendation, not necessarily with any dollar numbers inserted, but perhaps the language around a recommendation for you to begin getting comfortable with what you would be putting forward. And based on how the data breaks down, you could start getting perhaps in a range of where you might be. In addition, we certainly, by that point in time, could have language on the CPI and how that would impact out-year increases on top of any base rate. So you'd start to be putting a framework around that. Certainly that could inspire public input or discourse. And a final point that I think is in the notes that I didn't read aloud, but you could give feedback to the staff that would then inform what we would come back to you potentially the next week and have a more finite recommendation. In addition, it would be contemplated that at that meeting you could also take public testimony or public comment. In other words, this actually contemplates 3 opportunities for people to speak. One, before any recommendations have even been considered. A second opportunity when recommendations are starting to be formulated and discussed. And a third opportunity when those recommendations become more finite.
I'm sorry. Would it be helpful for recommendations? We've got the 4 distinct positions to tackle them one at a time, make a recommendation. Just trying to get through it, do the attorney and the mayor, and then and for staff, would that help? Or and preparing averages and.
I know that's how we were already preparing to think about it.
It works. Very good. Are we on the same page then with 5 o'clock PM on the 19th? Okay, for both, for the combined. Do we want to proceed to, or should we wait until the 19th to try to lock in the following week?
Certainly we could. To take into account any changes in
We can
in
certainly hold the
circumstance.
date just in the event that, because our schedules are extremely chaotic. So probably not a bad idea to hold at least one of these dates, and in the event that we're not prepared to proceed, we'll simply postpone and move forward. So is there a date, either the 26th, 27th, 28th, or 29th that works best for the commissioners? Is there a date that is a problem?
I hate to be a problem. I'm out of state the whole week. That doesn't mean you can't proceed without me, but
Well, given the nature of what's contemplated
Right.
for that meeting, it's not going to happen.
Sure, okay. Week of my wedding anniversary, and we always leave town for a week, so.
You don't have to explain
It's
that.
not optional.
You're gonna have a good time.
It's not optional, yeah.
That's right.
Remember, council's not compelling.
Okay, no jail, nothing like that, okay.
I might post if we get too further.
Yeah.
Understood. Understood. Yeah, we want to try to wrap things up as expeditiously as we can for a host of reasons.
So we're gonna look at the first week of June?
Yeah,
Do we wanna do that?
certainly.
Thank you.
Are there any dates?
Are we looking in the evening or in the daytime or all of the?
Oh, I think something along the lines of, well, let's see what's open, what works best for everyone. Go from there. 4 o'clock start time it's been what we've done most consistently. It doesn't mean we're wedded to it.
The 3rd is a great day, anytime. Just
I
throwing
could do
my-
the 3rd.
1 and 2 work best for me, if we're going into the evening. I mean, I can find time during the day, but if we're committed to the 4 o'clock, the 1st and the 2nd work best for me, or the 5th.
Yeah, on the 3rd, I'm open all day, so if we wanted to go earlier, that's fine. The other days work fine.
3rd of June. Right? It's a Friday.
I could do the morning of the 3rd.
At this stage,
I can do the morning of the 3rd.
I have a meeting from 10 to 12, so I don't know how early we're talking on the 3rd. I could do from 8 to 9:30 to give me travel time, but then I'm free from 12 to 5. So if anybody has any afternoon time on the 3rd.
That's good for me.
is the afternoon of the 3rd a problem for anyone? Or?
I have a commitment that I
Okay.
cannot change
Okay.
from 1 to 3 for sure.
After 3? The afternoon of the 3rd beyond 3 o'clock, does that work for everyone?
So I could start at 3:30.
I'd have a hard stop at 5:30. Let's push it at 5 would be best. Prepare them for a recital. Kids are not ready. We have already missed a couple lessons, so they will be there.
Did we already rule out the 4th?
No?
That's at
I could do the morning of the 4th.
only one. Okay.
I'm completely open.
Me too, all day on the 4th.
Ditto.
I could do the morning.
Right.
Morning of the 4th.
What about the morning of the 4th? That's any particular time? 10? No, is the morning
Is that not
a
working
problem?
for staff? So,
I would think we're finding out that all of us on all the dates are having some challenges, but I think we'll figure it out. It's probably more important that the commission figure out
Would we rather
when they're
do the
available.
2nd?
That wouldn't be an
No,
issue for me.
we need you here too,
Yeah.
so.
It's not all of us, it's
Okay.
one of us on each of the next.
I can do the 2nd during
Okay.
all the daytime.
Yeah, I can make the 2nd work.
Those?
If that's what we have to do, we just have a standing senior team meeting every Tuesday morning, but
Afternoon?
We have one too.
Afternoon?
But after 10:30, I'm free.
Okay, so
I can change what I have in the afternoon.
afternoon of the 2nd?
Rory?
I'm sorry, Thursday, Friday.
I'm not good, but.
Okay, the afternoon of the 2nd then.
As a whole.
Right.
I'm all good.
Okay, very good. Let's hold that.
What was the date again? I'm sorry.
June the 2nd, Tuesday.
Tuesday.
And what time will we know?
We're holding the well, I guess you don't want to hold the entire afternoon.
One to
Why don't we
five?
just make it-
Let's do,
1 to 5?
yeah, between 1 to 5.
And are we doing for that length of time, so that we finalize it for sure? Or should we do one more date the following week as a just in case date?
Might as well.
Yeah.
Lock the time.
It certainly wouldn't hurt us, but,
And that
And if
would,
we're
that
done,
would be our
we'll
limit.
go.
right, exactly.
Get
Somehow
lunch or
you
something.
think that's
Yeah.
what-
Okay.
Gosh.
I'm going to training all day on the 10th.
9th and 11th are open for me.
I could do the 11th in the morning or after 4.
I can do the 11th.
Morning or after 4 or?
Afternoon.
I
Okay.
can make the afternoon work on the 11th.
3 o'clock?
What do we hold, the
Oh.
11th at 4?
I thought we were talking 1 to 5 afternoon. I've been different.
This is our just in case.
We may only need an hour, how's that?
That's right.
So the 11th from 1 to 4, is that
No,
what?
no.
or-
No.
At 4.
At 4, okay,
You've
thank
been
you.
hooping too.
Okay.
You hear that, baby?
I know.
What date was that again?
June the 11th,
Sorry.
4 o'clock, if absolutely necessary. We hope to get it done on June 2nd.
We'll be done with commission.
And just to clarify with staff that you guys have your own ways of publicizing the public hearing that's coming up in less than a week next Wednesday. Okay.
Both legally, per the charter, which is in the city bulletin, which is published on Saturday, our policy is to do more than what's legally required, and so that will be by multiple news blast websites. So more than one email, more than one posting online, announcements at the next council meeting, but it will also be in the city bulletin.
Mike, would you mind, and maybe this is something I can just go online and get, but forwarding it to me so that, you know, part of our due diligence is reaching out to our constituencies that we can help share that message?
Sure.
That'd be great, thank you.
Do you receive our
I get
e-blast?
Media advice, advisory, I try to get everything.
Yeah.
So.
Because that's a problem for other reasons if you're not getting our advisories. We want you to get every advisory we send out, so. But you are getting the ones from the commission?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Me too.
Good.
Outstanding.
Ms. Lee, if you're not, we will make sure that you are. All right. Great.
Very good. If there's nothing further to come before the commission. Yes, ma'am.
I apologize.
Oh, no problem, by all
A
means.
few things that Arizona brought up, maybe that we should just look at or consider or somehow be thinking of as we go through the analysis. They mentioned looking at the median income compared to the median income of salaries in the area. So maybe that's something that we look at. Are there any trends at the state level that, you know, I know that the judges, that seems to be a trend, but maybe looking at that and considering what else has been done recently. If there's been any increased workload for some of these positions, they mentioned that being a consideration. How these things align with city employee salaries. So if there's anything that we should be noting, I think that would be important.
Okay.
Or any other major budget concerns that you anticipate.
That's great. Any other thoughts, comments from any other commissioners? No problem. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, very good. Nothing further coming before the commission. Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.